So one of the amazing things about the state of Israel is that Tzivyon Shabbat, the way that the Shabbat looks to the other people, is based on the Jewish law. And so a prime minister or minister that is officially visiting outside of Israel must not desecrate the Shabbat in the public. If they, by mistake or on purpose, turn on a light or any other electrical device in their hotel room, and nobody will say boo. But in terms of the actual face of Shabbat to the public, it has to be kept and also kosher. So if President Trump invited one of the ministers or the Prime Minister of Israel for a dinner in the White House, it would have to be kosher. And that is the law. And one of the most amazing prime ministers that actually followed this law, even though she was a communist and didn't really believe in God, is Golda Meir. When she was the Minister of Transportation before she became Prime Minister, she was invited officially to attend Churchill's funeral, which was of course on Shabbat. I don't know why, of course, but that's what it was. And so she found the hotel that is closest to Westminster Abbey, and she is the only official that walked behind the hearse instead of driving in an official car behind the hearse on Shabbat. I believe that was in the late 60s. I'm not sure exactly what year he died, but she became prime minister in 1970. So there's a clear consensus among poskim that one may not listen to the radio or watch television on Shabbat, even if the radio or television is turned on before Shabbat, so that no melacha, creative labor, is performed on Shabbat. It is forbidden, and for several reasons. First, if there are Jews who work at the station, which will be common in Israel but not so common in North America, one may not derive enjoyment from Shabbat desecration. So if somebody broke Shabbat for you, or even if they're for their own sake, the halacha is different. We learned in the laws of cooking on Shabbat that if somebody deliberately cooked on Shabbat for you, then both he and you are not allowed to enjoy the food ever. But if it was for him or for her, and they didn't know it's Shabbat or whatever, and it was by mistake, you are allowed to enjoy it after Shabbat, in the time that would have taken for that cooking to take place. And my computer is freezing again. Second, if all the station's workers are non-Jewish, like it is in North America, one may not listen to or watch broadcasts because it belittles and detracts from the honor of Shabbat. So what's called Kavod Shabbat, which was the introduction to this chapter. We already saw in chapter 2, Halacha 9, so, even if all the station workers are non-Jewish, one may not listen to or watch broadcasts because it belittles and detracts from the honor of Shabbat. We already saw that some maintain that one may not leave a flour mill running before Shabbat if it will continue to run on Shabbat, because the noise of the grinding detracts from the honor of Shabbat. But actually, according to Halacha, we are allowed to, because our machines do not have to rest. Listening to the radio and watching television are much more serious. While the mill makes noise that no one wants to hear, one who turns on the radio or television before Shabbat indeed wishes to listen to or watch on the Holy Shabbat. All would agree that this infringes on Shabbat honor. So, in 1991, when the first Gulf Desert Storm operation started in Iraq, and there were sirens on Shabbat, Israel invented something amazing, which is called Hagal Shaket, the quiet wave on the radio. And so that way it will only turn on if there's actually an alarm in your area, or they would turn it on for everybody and just say which area is being affected by the ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that were coming from Iraq. And just before we conclude with the halacha, third, it is a weekly activity, just as the prophets and sages forbade many things, as we saw in this chapter, that are reminiscent of weekdays, so too that our behavior on Shabbat would be different from that of a weekday. So too, we should prohibit listening to the radio and watching television on Shabbat. And the last reason, fourth, there's a concern that the radio or television might malfunction and listeners or viewers might try to fix it on Shabbat. We're not talking about the aerials as it used to be, but rather, tuning or switching channels, etc. One might want to raise or lower the volume or adjust the device in some other way. A similar concern led to the ban on using musical instruments, and the same ban should apply, which was the musical instruments was about fixing them, and so it is the same idea. For all these reasons, one may not listen to radio or watch television on Shabbat, even when they are turned on before Shabbat. For the same reason, it is also forbidden to set a timer to turn on a recording device or video or audio player. And so when Rabbi Melamed wrote this, it was before the first Gulf storm, first Desert Storm war in Iraq and Kuwait. And so I'm sure that in the Hosafot or in the comments, he does add this idea. And in the last year and a half, because missiles were coming from Yemen and Iran and all kinds of other places, there is such a thing as an alert on your phone. And so no rabbi is going to go against it because they're not doing it for their own pleasure. They're actually doing it for the sake of what's called pikuach nefesh, for saving their own lives. And so in that way, as long as it's not for your enjoyment, meaning you're not putting on a video or a television show on a Shabbat clock, there were people earlier, a few decades ago that did that. I think that most rabbis today, like Rabbi Melamed said, agree that that is not appropriate. But really, if we look at it completely objectively, it's not appropriate. But if it is really truly on a Shabbat clock, it will not be different from lights going on a Shabbat clock or other things. So we just have to be honest and figure out what our relationship is with Hashem, how we honor Shabbat, and how we try to make sure that we are following that kind of idea. So next tomorrow we're going to start studying the laws of Muktzah, which Sefaria amazingly translated as set aside to not be used on Shabbat. And so we'll open up for questions now. Is it recording?